Hello, everyone. Good morning for some of you, good afternoon for others. I'd like to officially welcome you to our webinar, Knowledge into Policy, Going Beyond Context Matters. We're happy to have so many of you on board, many people registered, and I think they'll be coming in too. Out and you will be able to see you'll be only able to listen to us today because internet connections usually is not that good for most of us. So we're going to upload. You will see there's some pictures from us. You will see me soon. Sorry. So that you can at least see some warm faces talking. But if we turn the video on, you will be experiencing some difficulties in listening. That could happen regardless the fact that we are not using video. Our internet connections in most of our countries are not that good yet. So if you experience any problems, please don't worry. We're recording the whole session, so you will be able to come back to the pieces you missed later on. For any consultations regarding the connection, or if you are experiencing difficulties, just write down in the chat and one of the presenters will be responding to you. This technology will also limit us in the sense of your participation, as you are not being able to watch us live and moving in the video. We will not be able to hear nor see you. We've tried to do that with many participants at the same time, and the sound really gets bad, and it takes a lot of time to connect and give voice to everyone. So we'll ask you to be patient and participate through this chat function that many of you are already using to greet each other. We will have two specific question and answers sessions. So for the very important questions regarding content and clarifications, please write them down separately on your page or on your computer. And when we open those pages, we will be able to scroll down and see whatever you're commenting and adding to this hopefully interesting discussion. So that being said, I'd like to introduce the team. I am the co-founder of Politics and Ideas, and I'm associate researcher at CIPEC, a think tank in Argentina, and also the director of the On Think Tank School. We have today also Leandro, who is also a member of Politics and Ideas. He's an independent consultant in the field of research and policy. He supports public agencies in developing their capacities to use knowledge, and also in designing and evaluating public policies through a mix of trainings, mentoring, and consultancy work. Clara from INASP, Clara Richards from INASP here, she's the director of INASP Weyrauch program and leads INASP work on evidence-informed policymaker. Her role there is to design and implement capacity-building interventions to support research use and also advocate for evidence-informed policymaking to build strong relationships with their partners. And finally, last but not least, we have Harsha Dayal today too. She's the Director of Research in the Department of Planning, Monitoring and Evaluation within the Presidency of South Africa. She is responsible for implementing DPME's research strategy and provides research support across various departments in her organization. So let me briefly share with you our agenda today, what we plan to do. I will briefly talk about the background of this study on context. I'm sure you're eager to learn how we came and we produced the knowledge that we're going to share, why we decided to focus on context. Then Leandro will present our conceptual framework. Many of you know that are already aware of this framework because we have a paper, but we have a product today to navigate and to show you what this framework reveals. And then next, I'll also give you some guidance on how to use it on the ground. We think it's really time to use this knowledge about context. And also we hope this is an opportunity to co-produce more knowledge with you about how to understand and use context knowledge to work and to promote the use of knowledge in policy. Then we'll have Harsha sharing on-the-ground experience, making context really alive, letting us know how this framework and the knowledge around it could be used, and also is connected to her own experience in South Africa. And then Clara will close up this session with some conclusions, final remarks, and we'll share some next steps about upcoming things that we want to do. Hopefully, with some of you, will get you interested in what we're doing. So why context? Why have we decided to do this knowledge systematization about context? Well, we're all aware of how many times literature, case studies, research from practitioners touch upon context and reveal how much context has mattered in whether some interventions have been successful or not in promoting the interaction between knowledge and policy. So context matters, we all know that. But as we talked more about how its weight and how much it affected intentions, we realized that we were many times speaking about context in a very broad way, and that there was an opportunity to really understand it more in detail and to really identify which factors, which forces that make up context are important in terms of our intentions and of efforts. And within that, we also decided to focus specifically when talking about context in public institutions. So when we are talking about context today, we are referring to the particular setting, the concrete setting where the practice of producing and using research for policy takes place. And that natural setting is usually the governmental institution. We, of course, acknowledge, and you will see later on, the role of the macro context, the big, large picture that surrounds the working and the performance of each public agency. And there are large forces there that we need to take into account. But it is also true that in the same context and with the same type of restrictions and opportunities, different public agencies perform differently in terms of producing and using knowledge. So there's a space to dig deeper and understand better how the direct context, the public agency, the organization as a context, has some set of dimensions that can explain and can help us better understand how we can do this better and what is working better or not. So that was our focus, and with that, our objectives in this whole study that we did were, as I said, first detect and explore which are the main contextual factors at the level of governmental agencies that significantly affect the promotion and use of knowledge in policy. And we also wanted to identify and systematize practices from different interventions. So we not only went to literature and took up conceptual approach, but we also talked with a lot of people because we wanted to identify what is happening on the ground level. And of course, this was directed to helping those, like I assume all of us are interested in understanding better context, but we want to understand better context to probably be more effective and be more strategic when we try to identify where the most promising potential areas of change are. And this is geared towards different types of intervention. We are not only talking to policymakers today who are designing or implementing change within their agencies, but we are also trying to use this knowledge to contribute to researchers and their own endeavors in understanding from research or using research to influence policy. We also we have a lot of implications from the framework for capacity building experts. So whoever is helping develop capacities within the state agency or with other relevant stakeholders to promote the use of knowledge in policy, and even donors and supporters of these efforts. So hopefully we'll have something valuable for all of you today. We did all this following some principles. One is that we really regard knowledge as one of the valuable contributions to the policy processes. We understand that knowledge is one of the factors that people, persons, and agencies take into account when designing, implementing, monitoring, and evaluating policies. So there are other many relevant factors like ideology, political party ideology, cultural idiosyncrasies, values, beliefs, the pressure of different outside groups, the relationships with other governmental agencies. So in this large interplay of factors, knowledge is a very important one, and we want to promote that it is better used and more used. But we also acknowledge that this is in interaction with many other things that are taking place within people's minds when they need to make decisions. So how can we make it a better part, a better piece of that puzzle of making a decision? Another principles that we really wanted to partner with policymakers in these efforts, people that are doing this on the ground. So for that, we had a very rich group of mentors. We had 3 policymakers, current or former policymakers, helping us out to think from the very beginning, how to build the framework, how to detect practices, how to take conclusions of, based on what we have found, and also a capacity building expert. And all this was done thanks to what many of you have done. Many of you, I see your names and who is there, so we have quoted and used papers and reflections from many of you. So we want to build on what others have learned. We have also talked with some of you regarding your experiences within the state. So we're building on what others have already learned, and we also hope that whatever we're sharing today will be used for you to build better knowledge about that. I have talked a little bit about methodology already. I told you about talking with mentors, having mentors, a group of mentors, and also we talked with experts who are constantly trying to understand better how our field, to both think about how the framework could be set up and also detect practices. We did a literature review. We thought there's much more that we can do in terms of literature, but we used the most relevant literature in terms of what we were trying to understand, very focused on context. And also, of course, we have background on this. So many of the things we've read before and discussed before came in. And this, what we call this experience scanning. We did in-depth interviews with 48 mid-level and senior policymakers and practitioners across the globe, with a special focus on developed countries, sometimes with developing countries, but we sometimes spoke with developed countries when we thought they had experiences that were really applicable and would shed light into the questions we had in terms of context. So that's the way we produced what we can share with you today. As I mentioned before, we have a paper. Many of you have read it already, and we have discussed with some of you the main pillars of this paper, where we present a conceptual framework composed by 6 dimensions. Leandro will talk about it in just a second. We then have a practical paper with very concrete implications. These implications are for different users, and I'll talk about it after Leandro, and I'll walk you through some of them so that you can use that you can learn how to use the framework in a very concrete manner. And this is all available in an interactive product, which we will navigate very soon. So I'm turning now the voice to Leandro, who will be sharing with you this interactive product, first presenting the conceptual framework, and then I'll also continue navigating the implications so that we can get into the practical side of our story. So thanks, Leandro, all yours now.
Hello. Thanks everyone for joining. Please let me know if you can hear me well. Great. So, okay, thanks Vanessa for this presentation about the background of our study. As Vanessa said, we will now navigate through this interactive product that summarizes most of our study. So you should see this website in your screen. We will also send via chat the link to the website in case you want to open it in your own computers. So let me now introduce our framework to get knowledge into policy. So we understand this framework as, above all, a lens we built to understand what is context at the institutional level. For building this framework, we have used a systemic approach in the sense that we believe that the components of any system, including policymaking systems, can be best understood if we put the lens in relationships with each part and also with other systems rather than in isolation. This is why we consider government institutions as part of the larger policy-making systems. As you should see here in the screen, we have different state agencies that continuously interact with other institutions and with other systems. To influence the way that policy will develop. So you'll see different institutions like media, donors, citizens, private companies. So this picture gives us a sense of the interrelated links between state agencies and also with others institutions. That's an important point to consider, and it's at the basis of our framework. So what is the objective or the intention of our framework? We hope and we believe that this framework can help its users to better assess their context, the context in which they operate, and identify where is more potential for change, and also where there are more barriers in terms of using research in policy. We believe that if users apply this lens to a particular government scenario, institution, organization, they will be able to identify what to do with who and how in a more effective way. So after this brief introduction, I would like to present the main features of this framework. As Vanessa said, this framework is fully presented in the first papers that we shared with you. You can also download the two papers in this. I hope you're watching this red arrow where you can download the two papers. So the first one is the one that presents the framework in a full, in a comprehensive way. Remember, this is a summary. This interactive product presents a summary of that study. Okay. Remember, I will go through this. I will present this in this screen, but you can watch it at your own computers if that's more comfortable for you. So the other presenters share the link in the chat. So as Vanessa said, the framework presents 6 dimensions. You'll see 1, 2, and the other 4. So these dimensions fall into 2 categories. The first 2 are external dimensions, which are the macro context and the intra and interrelationships with state and non-state agents. And the other 4 are internal dimensions. So we are referring to culture, organizational capacity, management and processes, and other resources. So let me tell you what we understand by each of them. If you stand on each of these dimensions, which are the big circles, you will see the different definitions, broad definitions for each dimension in the right column. I am sharing the example of macro context. So if you stand on macro context, you will see that the right column appears with the general description of what we understand by macro context. So this is an important characteristic of our framework, the fact that you can extend or you can select the dimension that is of your specific interest. You don't need to concentrate on all the dimensions at the same time. In terms of practical use of this framework, you can choose the one or the ones, the dimensions that are critical to your work, and then come back to it or to others dimensions as things evolve in your context. So let's start with dimension 1. I would like to give a brief overview of each of them. So by macro context, we understand the overarching forces at the national level that establish the bigger picture in which policy is made. So these forces shape the general context or compose the general context for each policy making institution, and it includes the political, the economic, the social, and the cultural systems that surround that institution. This macro context will shape opportunities and threats for state agencies that want to use research, at least in two main ways that we have identified. So we have this macro context is composed by structural factors, which very rarely change in significant way. We are referring to the issues such as political freedom, competition, and big structural factors. And then we have circumstantial factors, which emerge every once in a while and open very specific windows of opportunity for change. So, for instance, we are referring to a specific crisis or specific pressure by the citizens, and so on. So a simple example of how macro context affects the use of knowledge in policy will suggest that, for instance, a greater degree of democratic openness will lead to the creation and institutionalization of norms on consultation and participation in policy processes, which directly influence how evidence impact policy. So this is the logic that each dimension will suggest a way in which it influences the use of knowledge in policy institutions. So let's move to our second dimension, which is, if you stand on the big blue rectangle, you'll see, don't pay attention now at the smaller circles, let's pay attention to the definition. So this second dimension is refers to the intra and interrelationships with the state and non-state agents, and while it is still part of the macro context, we identify two particular types of relationship that have significant influence on how knowledge interacts with policy. The first type of relation is related to internal relationships between the public institutions and other government agencies, that is, peer agencies. While the second type of relationships refers to the interaction with relevant users and producers of knowledge who can affect or be affected by policy design and implementation. Let me share a brief example again. In terms of external relationships, the existence of policy forums or networks for sharing knowledge and technical expertise is frequently acknowledged as a very important factor that contributes to the use of knowledge in policy processes. So let's move to our third dimension, which is culture. We understand culture as the set of shared basic assumptions learned by an organizational group, and these assumptions have been working for a while in an organization and are perceived as the correct way of thinking and field organizational problems. And as you know, this culture creates the daily context for practice and includes issues such as incentives and motivations. And culture is in nature a less tangible aspect, and oftenly a more difficult aspect to work with. For instance, under culture, we can consider the extent to which an institution gives value to evidence. And there are some agencies that, due to tradition or the will of political leaders, will include more actions related to the use of evidence, while others we will consider researching as non-work, in the sense that they will prefer to move on with more concrete actions rather than researching. Sorry about this brief insight in each dimension, but you can continue then alone in the website. So, the fourth dimension refers to the organizational capacity that, in the sense of the ability of each organization to use its resources to perform and to act, especially related to the use of evidence. I will come back to this dimension in a while. Let me move to dimension 5, which is organizational management and processes. And as we all know, daily work in our organizations depends a lot on ongoing processes and policies. So this organizational management and processes dimension refers to how each institution organizes its work to achieve its mission and goals, and includes processes such as planning and evaluation. So the way an organization manages and the process and the mechanisms that are established can favor or not evidence to interact with policy. The last dimension refers to the set of resources that are critical to each organization's performance. So these resources are critical to achieve an organization goals, and include issues such as budget and technology. So, for instance, a state agency may present an organizational culture that appreciates the use of knowledge and staff with right capacities to generate research or use research, but if they lack financial resources, time, or infrastructure, they won't have real opportunities to use evidence in practice. So this was a brief overview of the 6 dimensions of our framework. As I spoke, you might have seen other circles appearing when we stand on each dimensions, and the reason why you'll see other circles, for instance here the red circle, is that each dimension contains sub-dimensions that should be considered. So the right column will also show you the definition for each sub-dimension and how they generally affect the use of knowledge. So let me show the example with organizational capacity dimension. If you stand on the big red circle, smaller red circles will appear, and these sub-dimensions refer to human resources, leadership, senior management, or legal capacity. For instance, if we stand on leadership, you'll see the definition in the right column, and here we see that the role of leadership is considered as one of the main enabling factors for change in terms of improving the use of research in policy. For instance, if those at the top of an organization appreciate research, it will favor more investment in research units or human resources linked to the research use. But if they do not believe in the importance of research, they will invest in other issues. So that's the logic of exploring the subdimensions. So you'll see that each big circle presents smaller circles, which are the subdimensions. So far we have seen that each dimension has subdimensions. You can explore them in depth depending on your specific interests. But there is more to explore in this framework. Together with each subdimension, you will see that each big dimension presents a big rectangle. For instance, this big red rectangle in organizational capacity. This refers to inspiring practices and mechanisms that we believe have potential to inspire others interested in promoting the use of evidence in policy. The idea of these practices is that they will shed light on how to address specific challenges within each dimensions. These practices are present in the second paper, which you can download from this site too. For instance, if we continue with the dimension of organizational capacity, you'll see 6 emerging practices, and you can click on each of them and the new window will open with a description of specific mechanisms, the stakeholders involved in the processes, challenges and lessons. For instance, South Africa has developed study tours for policymakers so they gain an understanding of the issues that support successful processes of use of evidence in other countries. Or for instance, the Ministry of Youth in Zimbabwe partnered with the local CSO to support the creation of a research unit. So if you are interested in specific experiences, you can turn to these emerging practices. So now I am coming to the end of my presentations. We have dimensions, subdimensions, and emergent practices. And of course, the links between these dimensions are diverse and changing. So macro context can affect management and processes, or culture can affect the way we use the resources. That's the interrelated logic that the framework presents. So just to close, let me remark that we believe that any player in the field, not only policymakers but also practitioners and donors trying to help public organizations use research, should consider this organization and decide what to do at the operational level with each of them. The idea is that it will help you make better choices. And for that, we will also share practical implication of this framework for different audiences. And that's what Vanesa will do right now. Thank you for your attention, and don't hesitate in drop us a line for more information after the webinar.
Thank you, Leandro. I think we've been able to share the overall framework, and of course that next step is to think about how to use it in practice, right? What does this framework tell us when we are working on the ground? And probably, I don't need to say that, many of you might be thinking about how this differently. Sorry, I'm just trying to put. Are you changing that, or am I?
Sorry.
Okay. No, that my presentation moved out. Okay, don't worry. So how do we use when we think about this framework, which is kind of conceptualizing what's going on, even though it provides some degree of clarity because it identifies main dimensions or subdimensions, probably in our everyday work, the way these dimensions look like and interact with each other are very chaotic and multiple, and many times even invisible, right? Invisible ways. So that makes us many times both unaware. Sometimes they are so implicit that we are unaware of their weight, and sometimes we feel so overwhelmed by their influence that we hesitate whether we can really produce tangible change. Well, when we're producing this knowledge, we want to focus on change. And as I said before, when sharing our objectives, we want the main driver to produce this knowledge was to help agents of change and to help them first better understand context. So we think that we hope that the framework is a good way to better decipher what's going on. But we also want to use that understanding, or help you use that understanding to inform your decisions when you are trying to create or strengthen spaces, systems, structures that enable a better use of research in policy. And we are doing this mainly thinking about policymakers, but we think that this is also a framework, and these tools can be used for those working with them and producing knowledge outside the state, and those building capacities for both users and producers of research and knowledge. So this context, as I was saying, is probably the way these different dimensions work out is not stable at all, right? When we are thinking about the way this operates, probably there are changes, and there's a lot of dynamism in the way the different stakeholders interact with each other and the way the different dimensions affect each other. Context is not stable at all. As large and as rigid as some structures and rules sometimes appear before us, there is always margin for maneuver. That's what we believe. Indeed, governmental institutions have changed throughout time a lot, or haven't they? Yes, institutions have changed, and this is a very first implication for mainly for researchers of our framework. We think that there's a lot of space to deepen learning about how governmental institutions learn. We need to build on literature and on practical experience of public reform. We are aware, even though we use part of it, we are aware that there's a lot of more knowledge in papers, books, and people who have dealt with changing government. And we think we can work with them more and more to find out which are the most fruitful ways to promote this new culture of production and use of knowledge in policy. So we need more literature systematization, we need more case studies, we really need to understand how public reform usually takes place, and then so we can become more aware of threats and opportunities, we can anticipate to challenges, and also link our changes with other changes that are taking place within governmental institutions. We think that a mistake sometimes is to isolate our efforts from other change efforts, and energy of change is one. So being more aware of how other things are taking place and what other type of change is taking place is a very effective way to link up what we can contribute with other forces. So how will this framework help us? Well, even though we have some practices which are really on the ground, we of course are aware that this is a very complex story. The framework is not an answer for us. Our framework is just a lens that we can use in many different ways, for different purposes, from different perspectives, also in different stages of policy. So we wanted to provide some guidance on how to use it. Leandro, if we can go back to the website, to our interactive product, you will see there that we have, yes, interactive product. We have there in the interactive product a set of implications. Right above, in the upper part of the, oh, we went back to the, hold a second. Yes, there we are. If you see above, you will see that we have a set of practical implications. Implications to embrace complexity, implications for policymakers, for researchers, and for capacity building experts. We really hope that these implications will lay the ground for many of us to begin reflecting on context in a very much concrete way, to really be able to detect exactly which forces of context will heavily affect our current intentions of change, but also be aware about those things that we should be concerned about, the things that we can change, the things that we cannot change, or where are the areas that are more ripe because they are reaching a point of crisis or because there's a large interest in some stakeholders to change the current status. So this looks at a very dynamic and complex and moving reality, although of course we try to depict some of this movement in having these circles with different subcircles. We know that this in reality is quite chaotic. We also want the lens to help you not only look at the big picture, but also to detect and prioritize which should be your areas, your main areas of intervention and concern. So let me briefly share with you a very interesting talk from Eric Weyrauch about how to use complexity and turn it into some simple decisions.
Do you ever feel completely overwhelmed when you're faced with a complex problem? Well, I hope to change that in less than 3 minutes. So I hope to convince you that complex doesn't always equal complicated. So for me, a well-crafted baguette fresh out of the oven is complex. But a curry, onion, green olive, poppy cheese bread is complicated. I'm an ecologist and I study complexity. I love complexity. And I study that in the natural world, the interconnectedness of species. So here's a food web, or a map of feeding links between species that live in alpine lakes in the mountains of California. And this is what happens to that food web when it's stocked with non-native fish that never lived there before. All the grayed out species disappear. Some are actually on the brink of extinction. And lakes with fish have more mosquitoes, even though they eat them. These effects were all unanticipated, and yet we're discovering they're predictable. So I want to share with you a couple key insights about complexity we're learning from studying nature that maybe are applicable to other problems. First is this, the simple power of good visualization tools to help untangle complexity and just encourage you to ask questions you didn't think of before. For example, you could plot the flow of carbon through corporate supply chains in a corporate ecosystem, or the interconnections of habitat patches for endangered species in Yosemite National Park. The next thing is that if you want to predict the effect of one species on another, if you focus on only that link and then you black box the rest, it's actually less predictable than if you step back, consider the entire system, all the species, all the links, and from that place, hone in on the sphere of influence that matters most. And we're discovering with our research that's often very local to the node you care about, within 1 or 2 degrees. So the more you step back, embrace complexity, the better chance you have of finding simple answers, and it's often different than the simple answer that you started with. So let's switch gears and look at a really complex problem, courtesy of the US government. This is a diagram of the US counterinsurgency strategy in Afghanistan. It was front page of the New York Times a couple months ago, instantly ridiculed by the media for being so crazy complicated. And the stated goal was to increase popular support for the Afghan government. Clearly a complex problem, but is it complicated? Well, when I saw this in front page of the Times, I thought, great, finally something I can relate to. You know, I can sink my teeth into this. So let's do it. So here you go, for the first time ever, a world premiere view of this spaghetti diagram as an ordered network. The circled node is the one we're trying to influence, popular support for the government. And so now we can look 1 degree, 2 degrees, 3 degrees away from that node and eliminate like 3/4 of the diagram outside that sphere of influence. Within that sphere, most of those nodes are not actionable, like the harshness of the terrain, and a very small minority are actual military actions. Most are nonviolent, and they fall into 2 broad categories: active engagement with ethnic rivalries and religious beliefs, and fair, transparent economic development and provisioning of services. I don't know about this, but this is what I can decipher from this diagram in 24 seconds. When you see a diagram like this, I don't want you to be afraid. I want you to be excited. I want you to be relieved, because simple answers may emerge. We're discovering in nature that simplicity often lies on the other side of complexity. So for any problem, the more you can zoom out and embrace complexity, the better chance you have of zooming in on the simple details that matter most. Thank you. That matter most. Thank you.
So hope you've all been able to hear it well. I think this is a very good example of how our framework could also be used. The framework, in fact, is an effective tool for us to zoom out, to first do a very integral and comprehensive diagnosis of your own situation, whether from within the state or if you're trying to work with some state agencies. So we propose that you first do this zooming out and assess how your public agency or the state agency you are working with is standing today regarding these 6 dimensions, and there are sub-dimensions as well. This is, for example, further explained in implication number 1 for policymakers for the design of interventions. You will see there that we recommend to develop a sound assessment to have a clear and common understanding of context. So to really use all the dimensions and see where you are, which are the dimensions that are playing a heavy role and which are the sub-dimensions that you need to be concerned about. Doing this, we don't want to forget about complexity. So for embracing complexity, if you go, for instance, to implication number 1, bring on perspectives to embrace complexity, we make here the point of the importance of trying to build this diagnosis in a very participatory and interactive way. So bring others to find out how these dimensions and sub-dimensions are interplaying. We will probably find out that there are divergent views on which are the ones who have more weight, where there is space for change, because motivations, interpretations, and usually vary, right? And this will, of course, generate different actions and behaviors on stakeholders. We cannot anticipate all, but the more we are, the better we are equipped by starting to speak with others and building a diagnosis that interacts, makes our views interact with those of others, we will be able to do it better. And for this, I mean, without avoiding and knowing that we will not be able, of course, to fully capture a whole picture. Sometimes we don't have that much time, and we don't want to invest all those resources and speak with everyone inside and outside the state to have to build this diagnosis. We also provide some concrete tools and baby steps. For instance, in this specific case of about bringing on perspectives, if you scroll down, you will be able to see that we have some tools to do this type of work, and we also have some baby steps. For instance, a baby step that we suggest for developing this type of assessment is to select 2 members of your organization or team, views about these contextual factors, which ones are important for them, and also which ones they would prioritize in terms of the change that could be done and conducted by others. So this is just a start. As you navigate through other implications, you will see how after zooming out, you can use this lens to also zoom in and detect which are the things that are under your sphere of influence and which ones are the ones you should be concerned about, as well as to become more aware about the capacities and the resources of your people, your team, and to assess whether they are enough for the changes that you intend to do or whether you need more help and what type of help. Indeed, teamwork is crucial for this. Seeing the effects of culture and organizational capacity, those dimensions, culture and organizational capacity, are really important in creating a healthy organization that becomes effective in the use of research and policy. And this, of course, taps into what Leandro had already mentioned about leadership. Leadership combined with good management and great human resources play, of course, a pivotal role. That's why, for example, if you go to implication number 1 under the implementation, if we're thinking about the implementation stage of interventions to promote the use of research, we there emphasize the importance of nurturing genuine involvement of critical stakeholders. And we provide you there with some very concrete ideas on how to try to do this more and better. So please, this is an invitation for you, depending on who you are and what you're doing, to explore the implications, and there you will see that they are interconnected with each other, because indeed our work isn't and shouldn't be isolated from the efforts from others. So complexity will remain. She's our guest We don't want her out of the table. We are welcoming it, but at the same time, we try to provide some concrete ideas on how each of us can work differently based on a more thorough and detailed understanding of context. So let us all start thinking about and identifying what matters right now for us as agents of change. Hopefully these implications, these emerging practices and the framework will enable you to be more strategic and to interact more strategically with those different forces and become more aware that they change in time and what we can do and with whom to move things along the directions we are interested, co-constructing with each other. This is a way to bring on a larger awareness of interdependency and being able to detect the critical points of entry for our contributions in connection with what others are doing, are expecting, or are not willing to do. So this is an invitation for all of us to begin. We'll open a space right now for questions and answers, both related to Leandro's presentation of the conceptual framework and about the implications. Please write them down in the chat function, as I will have 10 minutes for that, and we'll take them as they come, first come, first served, and we'll answer those, and then we'll have a second part where Harsha will talk us about her real on-the-ground experience. Yes, I see Fred asking about economy and governance. Yes, these are part of the macro context. We were able to go into each of the main dimensions, but we have some factors that are the usual knowledge factors in literature, and there you will find these large factors that are related to the overall political, social, and economic setting. They are critical in the macro context. But also we think that even though sometimes, of course, economy and overall governance affects, the governance also has to do with the degree of power distribution. Within the same context, some agencies come up with some new ideas and they can implement new ways of doing or using research, while others can't. So we don't want to overemphasize to the role of macro context. Sorry, Leandro, you should have gotten that. I was speaking, I got directly, but let's respond depending on what people ask us about. So conceptual framework questions for Leandro, practical implications questions for me. Thanks.
Sorry, I hope you can hear me. So we have a question from Makesh, who says,
I can pick up that one because it has to do with the implications. Yes,
okay.
Of course that we have room for emergent property. If you go into detail in the design and the implementation of interventions, we make several points regarding to our capacity to, instead of using rigid and linear plans, to use the emergency approach and to be able to be aware and to detect emerging patterns, to work with others and become catalysts of things that are coming up more naturally. So yes, totally.
So
the next ones are yours, probably, Leandro.
Sorry, so the question from Fatima, so asking if the framework will operate when government is not receptive. So, well, one of the objectives and functions and use of this framework is to understand whether an organization is receptive, or to what extent it is ready or not to embark on a process of enhancing the way it incorporates evidence to policy decisions. So my answer is yes, it will help you understand to what extent conditions are ready to embark on a process and which characteristics should that process have. So where you can start, what are the main barriers, what are the main opportunities. In that sense, I think the framework will help you. But of course, if the organization is not receptive, well, the opportunities for change will be need to conduct carefully and try to understand the windows of opportunity. Can I continue? Yes. So Sarah asked if the framework consider fragile and conflict states. So yes, the idea is that you ask, similar to the question to Fred's question, you can look at those aspects of the in the macro context I mentioned. So what are the macro context conditions in a certain state, and how, to what extent that influence the use of knowledge in policy at the institutional level. So again, the answer is yes. Rather than being considered, the bet is that you will understand how the macro context influence the use of evidence in policy, whether it is a fragile state or a well-developed state in terms of macro context factors.
Yeah, what is important to say probably is that while applying the lens to different settings, be it countries where government is not receptive to research in general at all, or fragile, or states that are undergoing conflicts, probably the room for change and the opportunities for change and to embed a new culture are lower. So these factors, of course, play differently against or for change. So what we hope this will help is each of us to have a better understanding of where possibilities. And sometimes if the macro forces are that large, it's just about starting on a more local level, where there is some different, I mean, there's more, maybe a different culture or a willingness to do something differently because there's some more degree of freedom of expression, or there's larger academic development, and there are researchers who could be interested in at least increasing the relevance of their research to policy and to begin to interact with some policymakers. So this is, of course, will reveal very different settings, and the weight of the forces might be very overwhelming and kind of even, make us aware of the difficulty and where we need to start. Maybe it's just starting, we are not even able to design an intervention right now, but just to promote dialogues and awareness to try to change in terms of culture, values, and beliefs around research in general. I see that there are, maybe we'll take these 3 more, Leandro, and then turn to Harsha, because this is very interesting. Yeah. And I think we will host, we'll tell you later about discussions that we plan to have, but we're running a little bit late. So let's take these 3 and then we'll switch to Harsha.
Yes, so there is a question from Deji. So asking if we have piloted this framework in any context. This is the content is just being launched in terms that the study we've finished with this study a couple of a month ago or so. So we haven't had the possibility yet to apply to a present or an organization with ongoing processes, but we have used this framework to analyze experience that are told in literature, and also experiences or processes that we, organizations that we conversate with some of the human resources. So we hope, our bet is that we will have the possibility to work with state agencies and apply this framework in practice, but without the need of being us who use the framework. If others will use it, we will be very happy and we welcome that. And of course, the lessons and the feedback on to what extent this help or what are the challenges in its use. So, but for concrete examples, you can turn to the first paper and also the second paper, and you will see some many boxes with concrete examples of different developing countries illustrating the different dimensions and how they can explain the way they affect the use of knowledge in policy.
Okay. Then, of course, that based on what Rose is saying, of course, that there are some aspects like the soft side aspects like leadership or culture, motivations and beliefs under culture in those settings that are more political are more important, while if you think about more bureaucratic settings, that's where the dimension of management and processes and resources become more important, because some things are more established, and that's the stage where one needs to focus on the specific and concrete mechanisms that take place to enable the production of high quality and policy relevant research and the use of it. And Sarah is here making a very interesting point, of course, that there are a lot of trade-offs. That's why we insist on the practical implications and the baby steps we put there. Baby steps are like some ways to bridge this gap. We are aware of the complexity and that many of us don't have the resources or the time to do all this deconstruct, and that people are trying to isolate and deconstruct instead of being systemic. But the whole work and our whole systematization revealed again and again that we need to try to be a little bit more like ecologists and think more about interdependencies. And sometimes it's just a baby step, just a tool, just a meeting, just a changing our traditional approach and making it a little bit more inclusive, engaging some more people. So this is a process, and we're aware that it's not easy, but we think that the way to go is to become more systemic. Yes, I think, I don't know, maybe if we can take, there are a lot of interesting questions, but I'm not sure how much time we have, Leandro.
I think
here about the best practice. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. No, we should turn to Harsha, but we. So yes. Yeah. Sorry, Vanessa, you can continue.
No, I just end up with two things related to Kirchhoff's and Anne's comments. Yes, personal benefits of officers are part of the culture. And I mentioned that we think there's a lot more to learn about incentives and motivations, and not only looking at the formal roles and responsibilities, but looking at the informal motivations, benefits. It's very important, and this is where we found less practices and less information about, and where we think there's opportunity to dig more deeply into understanding the overall role and weight of culture and processes and ideas to deal and to work to change this culture. And I think Fred was responding to Anne in terms of the no best practice. Yes, we didn't use the term best practice. We think that it's more about emerging practices, practices that are organically emerging, that can be used as a source of inspiration for those working in these areas. And probably you will need to tweak them around and think what could be of relevance and use for you, but each one has to find and craft its own solution. We don't think that there are best practices. The practices depend on the interaction of all these factors, and the emerging practices are just ideas to get us inspired. Yes, so now, thank you. I will try to set up. We'll have upcoming webinars. So please, those questions that you still have there, have them or write them to us. Unfortunately, we have no more time. We need Harsha to get started. Thanks. Very interesting contributions. So now it's all up to Harsha, who's going to bring on her real life experience. Harsha? Yes.
Hi, thank you. I hope all can hear me. Thank you, Vanessa and Leandro, for the opportunity. I am going to start off now and, okay. Thanks, you can hear me. I think it's a real honor to be able to share my thoughts on this platform, as this is quite an important topic, which already has been demonstrated through all these interesting questions and discussions thus far. You have been introduced to me through where I'm positioned, but I'd like to just say to you that in terms of my personal reflection on the focus and the principles of this framework, it comes from my background working in the public health sector for 15 years, which I really escaped from and worked as a social science researcher for 7 years in a research institution. And now I find myself in a senior management service at working in the policy space directly. So I'd like to share those personal experiences with you, reflection exercises with you. But I think that we won't be able to bypass some of the key obstacles in the South African context that still hinder the use of knowledge in policy spaces. And then I'd like to just briefly refer to 3 statements of intent that transform our challenges into strategic intentions for DPME. So moving on, what makes this framework unique, which I had the privilege of starting to engage with already, is that it's about knowledge in policy. I share with you these broad reflections on the focus and principles because it kind of guides the content of this framework, and maybe we can take this also further into a discussion. It gives us equal attention and insights into understanding both policy and knowledge within one resource. And that's quite rare to find because we have to always be looking for resources all over that speaks separately about what policymakers should be doing and what researchers should be doing. It takes into account reality of day-to-day work of government agencies. And here it needs to be highlighted that the methodology used to develop this framework covered much ground in finding appropriate literature and therefore meets a critical need in focusing on the factors that affect the use of this research at the level of government institutions. The distinction between macro and micro context is a critical starting point, as many of us somehow get stuck at just describing our context and become overwhelmed with what to do next. Macro level contexts are mostly beyond our sphere of control or influence. And then zooming into the micro level addresses more the demand side needs, in my opinion. This in understanding and working with the way the framework has put it, the operating model of governmental agencies. And finally, together with the corresponding document that was just presented by Vanesa on the practical implication, it most importantly provides these practical tools in recognizing and managing the actors across the agencies, and we all know that actors are never neutral. So I would like to just share with you these key obstacles we identified when facilitating knowledge to policy. We have to acknowledge that there are so many more challenges depending on which lens you are looking through. So I will only go through those I'm emphasizing for today's forum fairly quickly, just for you out there who are working in this space or want to influence this space to see if they resonate with you. There is little recognition of the public sector as a relevant contributor of evidence and knowledge. We are mostly categorized as users of knowledge. There is a predominant culture of compliancy, upward reporting, and low demand for data, information, and evidence. There is absolutely no career path for researchers in the public sector, especially in South Africa, with the lack of innovation in policy-relevant research methodology. We also note that organizational structures, management skills, processes, or systems that don't support individual efforts. And this I come from my own personal experience in this situation, that to use data, information, evidence in policy in any sustained manner. So that's what I'd like to also be highlighting in the slides to come. Just to continue, weak in-house capacity to use evidence, which translates into poor policy development is really the part that extends also into the institutional context. And I think the question was also raised into the three arms of the state, and this is speaking to mostly the executive or the bureaucracy, but it equally applies to how parliaments and the judiciary function as organizations in bringing knowledge into policy spaces. The unequal playing field of senior public officials in policy analysis. And this, I'd like to highlight the research infrastructure that remains underdeveloped and uneven across the public sector, the South African public sector specifically. Together with we all know that time is of essence, and I think people mentioned that in the discussion points already, but time constraints and competing priorities are actually compounded by organizational incapacity to generate and use, store and use knowledge in policy. If I then just come into our own organization, these obstacles that I have just mentioned are those we feel need to be overcome in our attempts to fulfill the research roles for DPME. We identified these roles: research agenda setting, championing for policy relevant research, knowledge broker, and capacity development coming from the demand side. In coming to a consensus on these roles, we went through an extensive consultation process internally and externally. This was part of a diagnostic study that is still underway to understand and work with our context. So this framework is therefore so timely introduced as a resource for DPME. I share with you three statements that currently describe thematic areas of our work, almost like affirmative statements that bring us back to our intent every time and whenever we tend to lose our way somehow. So the first one being that government is an actor and a contributor in the knowledge space. Taking into consideration that the obstacles identified in terms of challenges, if knowledge is to be generated as well as used in government and its agencies, there needs to be a shift away from the existing culture, which is reflected in these challenges. I provide a key message from the framework that hit home for me. Culture at individual, team, and organizational levels of any public institution creates the daily context for practice. So with the diagnostic study underway by DPME currently, Dimension 3 deepens the understanding of culture and provides a structured approach to assess this complex dimension for us. The second statement is that public agencies need to function optimally as organizations to facilitate knowledge to policy. This may seem obvious and simple, yet we find organizational dysfunction becoming the reality despite mandates are delivered, audit reports submitted, protocols followed, etc., etc. Only those officials internal to the system can acknowledge and be directly affected by organizational stress. The debates and discussions on the capacity needed to fulfill DPME's research roles is being guided by the Dimension 4 on organizational capacity. DPME is already working with many partners in developing capacity in the area of evidence-informed decision-making, and therefore this statement is not taken lightly. Our work in partnership with two different funded consortiums on building capacity for the uptake of research evidence, in short, the two BQO projects, already mentioned by Louise from the University of Johannesburg and the Weyrauch group, validates a lot of the contents of this framework. Recent strategic planning sessions by senior managers and leaders within DPME have included evidence use explicitly, yet operationalizing these challenges management approaches and existing processes as outlined in Dimension 5. Our starting point to equalize the playing field for government is facilitating access to scientific output databases and secure other knowledge infrastructure, as we have seen in the Dimension 6 that was presented. At an individual level then, it is actually important to value your own time and invest it in assessing, documenting, and updating the micro-level context in an inclusive manner. We have seen that in our discussion points already. Current projects like the evidence mapping exercise for the public sector we have undertaken with the University of Johannesburg demonstrates that effective relationships and networks are crucial in co-production and use of knowledge in policy. A very real issue in DPM is managing the varying interests, mandates, and approaches of government as well as other agencies confirms that complexities of the institutional and political context of policy making. We cannot bypass that, but we need to be able to manage it better. It's easy to identify your stakeholders, but understanding dynamics at play between state and non-state agencies means an analysis of those arrows between the boxes. And that's where the secret lies as detailed in Dimension 2, which focuses on these intra and inter-institutional linkages and relationships. A very practical example is on the implication of an analytical tool of stakeholder management from the framework, which we have already started to dabble into. This has shed light on how to manage our strategic position as a center of government department to facilitate knowledge into policy. I'm thinking then, just sharing these, in conclusion, there is still a lot to be said. And we cannot say that these are all the challenges that are remaining, or we have explored most of them. I leave you with a question to ponder on how ready are we to actually go beyond context and manage in practice the very complexity we describe in documents. Our case is that we are very proud of our achievements in a South African context, like the Square Kilometre Array program in South Africa. Yet we are reminded of contrasting contexts within contexts, where poverty, inequality, and unemployment remains our reality. My own learning path is guided by these questions on the right-hand side. What is the relationship between knowledge society and public policy? Government and its agencies are made up of individuals from society who may or may not value knowledge in the same way, and they are the ones entrusted with overseeing public policy for the broader public good. And where are you as an actor contributing the knowledge to policy space? This will help define your own micro context and provide insight into which partnerships need to be built. Finally, are you equipped to actually manage complexity and influence change within your organization? This comes not only with tools and frameworks as such, but also the kind of emotionality and determination, the soft issues that comes with dealing with complexity. So I leave you with these thoughts, and maybe we can take these into more discussion points. Thank you for your attention. I hand over to you, Vanesa.
Yes, thank you so much, Harsha. Very, very interesting insights and real life reflections. We open up, so again, the space. If you have any questions or comments on what Harsha has shared, come in. I see people typing already. We'll keep it short. But yes. I see here, yes. Here, Harsha, there's Mukesh asking about what do you mean by context within context. If you can further elaborate.
Okay.
Please.
Thanks. Yes, Mukesh. I mentioned contrasting context within context. So basically, I'm meaning that even within one macro context, you can find varying contexts of different socioeconomic situations. And this is a very real situation in most of the middle income countries, developing middle income countries, where you still have the poverty and inequality kind of indicators that are overriding some of the economic indicators. So these are contrasting, but within a context that you may find yourself in. I hope that is what I actually meant, but in terms of contrasting is the key or the operative word really there. I see that
Arnal has one there too. Yes, we want to take that one, Harsha.
the 3 questions, or which one? Oh, I would like to know about the practice.
About the factors that gave you the authority or mandate to
Oh,
conduct this
yes,
assessment.
this assessment. So basically, there was no strategy for taking knowledge to policy. In our terms, we were simply calling it a research strategy. There was no research strategy in DPME. A lot of the different units and the different programs within our organization was doing their own thing in a way. We did a lot of research. There was a lot of research commission, a lot of in-house analysis being done, but not coordinated in any way. Also, there was the work that previously started around evidence-based policy making, which was also on a project level, but not really embedding, evidence use at the organizational level. So we then collapsed the development of the research strategy, which was lacking, with the work that was needing to be done, and some of the initiatives, like you all know about the evidence-based policy making course that we had piloted. All these are being streamlined into the strategy that we have put on the table actually already. Now comes operationalizing it. So the authority did come from leadership right up. It's now about putting it into action and implementing it. And this is where partly even a good strategy can collapse if we don't implement it well.
Thanks so much, Harsha. I think we have no more questions here, and we're running out of time. I'm really sure that people will want to learn more from your experience. So let's think about future spaces to interact with you. We are aware that we're all interested in seeing how these things play out on the ground. So your presence here was key for us today. So thanks a lot for that.
Okay. Okay, you're welcome. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for your attention and for just being part of it already. It helps.
Great. Well, so I'll turn now to Clara, who's going to wrap up. We're sorry that we're running a little bit late. We started a little bit late to accommodate everyone, and I hope you are still, I'm happy to see that most of you are still here to kind of finalize this space today with you and let you know what our plans are like. Hopefully, we'll continue interacting in the future. So Clara, all yours now.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Vanessa and Leandro, for talking us through the framework. And yeah, Harsha, great to hear from your own experiences in South Africa. So from INASP, we were very proud to be part of this endeavor, which hopefully can help different stakeholders improve the way they think about knowledge and policy. In INASP, what we think is particularly helpful is the fact that the framework acknowledges the complexity public institutions operate in, embracing rather than ignoring the challenges that these entail. From our side, we are highly interested in making capacity building efforts more meaningful, long-lasting, and sustainable. And we think that this approach can help us go in that direction. Of course, it can be tempting to focus our efforts on technical solutions only, but we all know that this alone does not work. So promoting the use of evidence needs to therefore take all the political or soft dimensions into account. This is usually acknowledged and expressed, but not necessarily acted upon. So we hope this framework can help you put this into practice. So this particular framework is not a set of fixed guidelines. There's no one recipe. It is rather a set of orientations that can be adapted to each context. As you explore the product further, you'll realize that instead of talking about best practices, it refers to emergent practices, recognizing that each context might have different solutions to the same problem. I heard that also Vanessa highlighted the importance of producing knowledge on how these public institutions behave. We need more case studies. We need to learn more from experiences. So we really welcome your insights and ideas or your own practices on how you are actually doing some of these things already. There is a lot of implicit knowledge to be shared. We encourage you also to use the framework and to give us feedback. The idea is that this is a tool that can be used and improved over time. This is the first attempt to systematize knowledge and to put it together, but it will really become useful if everybody can contribute to it. So there are a few things that will be happening in the upcoming months in order to develop this work further. First, we will be running a series of webinars from October to March next year. So ideally, we will be doing one per month. And the idea is to explore more in depth the different dimensions of the framework. So the next one, for example, the first one will be exploring particularly the macro context. And for each one of them, we will invite external speakers and people with concrete experience and examples that can share with those who are interested. If you do want to participate in these, please get in touch with us. Second, we would like to develop a critical group of policymakers who are interested in supporting other colleagues around the world in going through a process of change. So if you feel you have lessons, knowledge, or skills to share and would like to support other fellow policymakers around the world, please do get in touch with us. And we'll try to develop this group further. Last but not least, on INASP's website, there are lots of resources to help you strengthen skills, knowledge, and attitudes to promote a culture of evidence-informed policymaking. For example, some of you have already participated in a webinar that we launched 2 months ago, presented a toolkit that gives you tips and ideas on how to better search for evidence, how to appraise it, and how to communicate it effectively. So you can download all of these resources for free on the website. And here on the slides, you can see the email addresses for any of these things. So if you want to take part of future webinars, if you'd like to take part of the group of policymakers, or if you want to give us feedback on the framework or share your own practices, please do get in touch with us on the email addresses that you see on the screen. That's it from my end. Many thanks to all the presenters, to all of you who have participated, and we hope to see you in the next webinar. Thanks.
Thank you all. So we'll be sending the recorded version and the presentations by email. Please share with everyone who you think might be interested in listening and participating in these spaces. Thank you.